Hi, I'm Diane D'Arrigo. I'm the Radioactive Waste Project Director at Nuclear Information and Resource Service, which is a nonprofit public interest group that started in the late 1970s to assist communities around the country that were targeted with nuclear power plants, nuclear power reactors, which inevitably would make nuclear waste, which to this day, decades later, has nowhere to go. There's not a system to isolate this waste from the environment and from the human gene pool. So we are concerned about the threat of this radioactive waste from nuclear power being shipped across the country, and the location targeted right now is Andrews, Texas. So it would go through many of the major cities, ports, transport routes through ranch and farm land in Texas, but also around the whole country. The radioactive waste from nuclear power lasts, some of it literally into the millions of years. Some of it is only a few years dangerous, but some will be dangerous for thousands and millions of years, literally. So it needs to be isolated from the environment. Now, I've been tracking the siting of nuclear dumps and the history of nuclear dumps since the late 70s myself. And most of the nuclear dumps in the country have leaked and are leaking. Many dumps, hazardous and solid waste dumps, also leak. So the reality is that we don't have the technology to isolate material for as long as nuclear waste lasts. And whatever communities get it there permanently or even supposedly interimly, they risk the long-term viability of their water supply, of the health of the environment, and people who are exposed have much higher risks of radiation-related health effects. And radiation causes cancer, everybody knows that. It causes birth defects, it reduces immunity, and so it makes us more susceptible to other diseases or influences, stressors than we would normally be susceptible to. And the site that is in Texas, in Andrews County, is run by a company called Waste Control Specialists. And they were the first new dump to open after the 6 original dumps in the country were determined to be inadequate and were leaking, and so the government wanted a new site, and it took many, many years for WCS to get its radioactive license, and it got it actually in a political way that was against the scientific recommendation of the entire scientific review team at the Texas agency that gave the license. They were concerned and are concerned that the site itself now will not adequately protect the water beneath. There are a variety of aquifers and water systems, and one of the most outrageous things that happened during the licensing process or shortly thereafter was the Waste Control Specialist scientists assisting the Texas Water Bureau on drawing the map of the Ogallala Aquifer so that it's 6 miles away from the site. Previously, it had been shown to be much closer. And there is a problem as waste is being buried now with water being there in the bottom of the trenches, and they've got to continually pump. So there's a real concern with water. It was overruled by the head of the agency, and the license was granted, and it was opened for not only commercial nuclear power waste, but also a massive burial area for the weapons waste from the nuclear complex all around the country. This is so-called low-level waste. Low level is not low risk. Some can give a lethal dose in 15 minutes unshielded. Some of it's long-lasting plutonium, 1/4 to 500,000 years. It's all in this so-called low-level category. That's concern enough. But now, Waste Control Specialists is in conjunction with its various business rearrangements It has a new name that's Interim Storage Partners. So ISP and WCS together are applying for the nation's high-level radioactive waste. This is the irradiated fuel from the core of nuclear power reactors, which is gives an immediate lethal dose or a few-minute dose if unshielded, will remain dangerous into the thousands and millions of years, needs to be isolated. And the proposal for Andrews, Texas, for the Waste Control Specialists Interim Storage Partners site is to bring 40,000 metric tons of this irradiated fuel, which is about a half of what we've got in the country right now, over the roads and rails and waterways, possibly through the Port of Houston, through Dallas, Fort Worth, through, wherever the railroads and the roads go, that's the way the waste would come in. And each of the containers has more radioactivity in it than released from, more cesium than was released from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in each container. Each container has more plutonium than was released by the plutonium bomb, the Nagasaki bomb that was dropped. So we've got unbelievably intense amounts of radioactivity. In fact, it is over 90% of all of the radioactivity in the nuclear power and weapons complex in this country. I've been told people don't know what that means when I say it. What I want to say is that uranium is mined and milled and processed and made into fuel, and the fuel goes into reactor cores to make energy or to make nuclear weapons. And the stuff in the core is, of the commercial nuclear reactors, has the most amount of radioactivity. Even the bombs and the bomb high-level waste is not as concentrated and radioactive as commercial nuclear power fuel. They call it spent fuel, they call it used fuel. I like to refer to it like they used to refer to it as irradiated nuclear fuel. It's super hot, and it would be supposedly sitting on the ground in Texas at the Andrews site on the border of New Mexico. For the license would be for about 40 years. It could be there 100 years. And they claim that then it's going to go somewhere else. And it's not necessarily going to go somewhere else because there is no somewhere else. The Yucca Mountain site, which has been promised as a permanent repository, is not capable of isolating the waste. It violates the Ruby Valley Treaty of 1863, which is Western Shoshone land. It's not US land. And the Western Shoshone are challenging the licensing of that dump. It's been canceled already administratively. So there's not a permanent site. There may be a need to be looking for a permanent site, but in the meantime, bringing it to Texas to waste control specialists is, I would say, one of the biggest mistakes that our country could make. And for Texans not to pull out every stop to prevent this, that is what you need to do right now.
I've got a question for you.
Okay.
Is it equally important to be concerned about the proposal for New Mexico as well by Holtec?
Yes, and I would say even more so, except that both of them are equally as dangerous. They're both the foot in the door. The site in New Mexico, proposed by Holtec and the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance. It's about 40 miles from the waste control site, just to the west. It is applying for an amount of waste that's more than we have in the whole country. The proposal that they've got could go up to 173,000 metric tons. We've now got in the range of 84,000 metric tons. And we're speaking now in the summer of 2020. Each year, another 2,000 metric tons is generated by the nuclear power industry in this country. So the waste control site, proposed site for high-level waste, the Holtec proposed site in New Mexico are both illegal. The current federal law does not allow for a supposedly interim nuclear site unless and until there's an operating permanent site. That was carefully and adamantly required because the Congress members were smart enough to know that if you didn't have a permanent place, it would de facto stay at these supposedly interim sites. So bringing it into a supposedly temporary site when there's no permanent one it's a de facto permanent site without the protections and the requirements that are necessary for licensing a permanent repository.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.